Hey guys, before we get started on today's show, if you could please like and subscribe to the channel or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps us just get more guests on the channel and helps provide you guys with more free information. If you want to book a call with Brooke and myself and talk about your real estate goals, you can do so in the first link down below in the description. It's absolutely free. There's no pushy sales tactics, and we're really just here to help you guys. Thanks so much for supporting the show. Welcome back to the Canadian Real Estate Homefront Podcast. Tons to talk about today. CPI, inflation, Toronto condo owners bleeding cash every single month. The market is slow. I call it the dog days of summer, but usually it is kind of slow around this time,
The
July and
dog
August.
days?
Yeah.
The
It's like
dog days.
it's like a
Never
saying.
know.
It's
Is
like a
it?
it's like a saying where I don't know, we can Google it, but things are just dead.
Okay.
Things aren't moving.
No, no.
Anyways, but yeah, let's hop into some stuff because there's still a lot going on in the economy. Um, we got a question on our Instagram, and I was just like, oh my God, like people just don't do a good enough job of understanding what's going on, especially mortgage brokers and everything like that. So I posted that photo of the Bank of Canada, how they cut their overnight rate to 4.5. And some guy commented on it. I just got locked into a 5.1% rate from the bank. Should I call them and say I want the 4.5 that they're offering?
Oh no. Okay.
So
Yeah.
let's hop into
Let's
that.
dive
So
into that.
yeah, that it doesn't work like that. So the Bank of Canada did cut rates, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they cut rates. They cut their overnight rate, which is the variable rate. So I responded to him and said, you most likely have a fixed rate set up for about 3 years if you're getting a 5.1. That's different. The fixed rate follows the bond yield. And remember, the bond yield, even on the news that the Bank of Canada cut rates, it didn't move too much because the bond yield is forward looking. It's very
The
forward
bond yield
looking.
came down about a week prior to the variable rates coming down, though.
Yeah. So
It's moving in the right direction.
for sure, your variable rate moves with the Bank of Canada.
Yeah.
That's what it says, the variable, and your fixed rate moves with the bond yield. But if you lock it in, it doesn't move. But when you go
Right.
to renew,
And
it'll move.
4.5% overnight rate. That doesn't mean your rate is going to be 4.5. That's what the Bank of Canada is lending their money to the banks. Then the banks typically add about 2% on top of the overnight rate, which is why the variable rate isn't 4.5. It's around 6.
Yeah, the variable rate's higher right now, which usually it isn't. So it's interesting to see, but that's what it all means. So the Bank of Canada did drop their rate. So here's a headline: Bank of Canada pivots to boosting economic growth, raising rate cut bets. The Bank of Canada is shifting its focus to boosting the economy rather than suppressing inflation, which raises prospects of further interest rate cuts in the coming months, analysts say. The Canadian Central Bank lowered its benchmark rate for a second straight month on Wednesday, cutting 25 basis points to 4.5%. It said downside risks to inflation are taking an increased weight in its deliberations. A faster pace of rate cuts would provide relief for heavily indebted Canadian households. It could also increase pressure on the Canadian dollar, which weakened on Thursday to a 3-month low of 1.3848 per US dollar, or 72.21 US cents. There's a pivot that has taken place with the BOC shifting its focus away from the inflation fight, which has been won, to an economic support, which is much more necessary. So basically, what's going on is the economy is getting so bad and inflation is coming down. We're seeing a contraction in GDP per capita. The housing market is slowing down. The unemployment is up. Basically, what the Bank of Canada is doing is they're starting to cut rates because the economy is bad. You know, a lot of people are celebrating this, but it doesn't mean a whole lot of good things. It just means that instead of inflation rising and us trying to cool it, it's actually decreasing, but in turn, the economy gets hit. So that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. You know what? It's interesting because I get questions a lot on the variable rate or the overnight rate has been high for so long that most people would assume that it's going to continue to trend downwards. So when purchasing a property, if we run, especially investment properties, so I'm going to be specific on investment properties. So if we run numbers on variable rate and we project forward, let's say over a 3-year term, if the rate, comes down another full point, by then, a year and a half to 2 years, I'd imagine it'll come down another point. Versus taking a fixed rate right now. So we did the numbers on same purchase price, same rent. Now let's do 4.89 fixed, which was offered to my clients as a fixed rate, and then a 6% variable. And it was interesting to see over the course of 3 years, even if that variable rate came down to 3%, which that's low, the fixed rate kind of staying at 4.89 for 3 years versus starting out really negative, it equaled around the same. So when you're comparing rates on which way to go, fixed rate or investment rate, fixed rate or variable rate, there's a couple things to look into too, of how long, like what's your term of not wanting to move that property or pull money out. Fixed rate's going to make it a little bit more difficult to break a mortgage than variable. But over a 3-year average, if we project the variable rates coming down further, most people are opting into, I wouldn't say most actually, a lot of people are opting into variable thinking, okay, well, I'm starting out at the highest, it's only going to go down, my mortgage is going to be cheaper, versus taking that 4.89 and riding it out three years. It kind of equaled the same, which was interesting.
That is interesting. That's kind of good to
Because you
know.
pay way more now in 6% variable versus 4.89 fixed, yes. But then if it surpasses or goes down further than the 4.89, the average versus just staying steady there the whole time. So they opted in for fixed just because they didn't want the changes or having to really, I guess, pay attention every time the Bank of Canada makes an announcement. And they don't plan on selling or refinancing in 3 years. It's more of a 5-year hold. But it's good if you're an investor. Doing these things are so important because obviously 4.89 could seem good now, but if you're doing it over the course of, let's say, 5 year, whatever it is, the numbers can change drastically. We also do this when it comes to amortization periods. So the difference in how much interest you'll pay. So let's say we bought a house for $1 million. Over 25, 30 years, you're going to end up paying $2 million for it, which is the crazy thing about real estate.
Yeah.
And then, once the mortgage is paid off, you're like, I made $1 million, but like, no, you actually paid it in interest over that course of that 30 years. Which is so interesting because you buy a house for $1 million, you pay off your mortgage after that period of time. And if it's worth 2 million now, you're like, oh my God, I made $1 million tax free, but you actually paid it in interest payments over that course of the amortization period, which is crazy to think. So running these to that level of scrutiny and it just clarifies things so much, and it kind of brings into perspective how much you're buying a house for at the end of the day, which brings me back to the point of buying a single family home right now is a liability, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Unless you're moving, you're upsizing, you're growing a family, and you have equity to put toward it. Like there's some ways to make things work. But if you're just a first time buyer and you're like, I want to buy a house, I have 200 grand, I want to buy a house for $1 million.
Hard to service it.
Right? I'll look at alternatives. Get something with a basement apartment where it can work as a future investment for you, unless money's not a crazy, crazy concern, which don't we all want to be able don't we all want to be able to say that? But I've been doing that more like in way more detail lately, and it's kind of like blowing my mind a little bit.
I know to service an $800,000 mortgage at these rates is still
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah.
Well, my one
Crazy.
mortgage, and thank God it's an investment property because I've furnished it, so I actually get way more rent than it should, if I'm being completely honest. But the mortgage is $7,600 a month. I started with it at 38 or something. Luckily, I bring in about 7 grand, so it's a little bit negative. And that's after me refinancing it. So I want to be clear that this investment property, when I bought it, definitely was cash flowing. I took out 200 grand. So I bumped myself into a negative on purpose because I had better plans for that 200 grand and leaving it in there to not be negative, if that makes sense. So paying the $600 negative per month, but allowing me to have my 200K in hand to make me way more than negative 600 per month made sense for me. It doesn't make sense for everybody. But it's nuts. Like my 3 mortgages together equal about 19 grand a month.
Oh my God.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy. That just shows you how high rates are. What were they at the low of COVID?
Mm-hmm. So my one mortgage was 2,700. My second mortgage was 38 or 37, like I was saying. And then the other one was 32. So
Under 10K. Yeah.
It makes sense.
Almost
And that,
double. Yeah.
yeah, and that leads us into our next topic, which you can read because I just kind of stole the floor here for a little while. Um, at the time of having all three of those, I'm laughing, right? There's so much cash flow, and now it's doubled. So there's a lot of people that it's very hard to be cash flow positive right now,
Hmm.
um, unless you're buying in places like Hamilton where it allows you to have that cash flow. But for for people that rented it, 3 years ago, these houses where my mortgages combined were 9 grand, now they're 19. Who can sustain that unless you're re-renting it at a higher rate or you're refinancing in. I've heard some terms refinancing in instead of pulling money out at the time of renewal, you're putting money in.
Yeah.
Um,
That's what I always talk about too, is like everyone was refinancing properties to get this extra 200 grand at a low
yeah.
rate. And now they're not going to do that this time around, right? Every
Mhm.
5 years, that's the most popular mortgage product. So to say that volumes are going to be high would be stupid, in my opinion, going forward, because you have renewals coming up, and then those renewals aren't going to be a positive equity position for a lot of people. They're probably going to be flat or maybe even negative at some point. It doesn't mean they're going to be kicked out of their house, but my point is people aren't going to be using their house as an ATM to go purchase more property, which
Right.
ultimately has led to a lot of people owning an investment property, since 2010 and on. But yeah, I don't foresee
Saddest
that happening
situation.
in the
Yeah.
2020s.
Yeah, no, I don't either. The saddest situation that I've seen is somebody that's bought a property, um, however many years ago, and have come to me after already having purchased with somebody else and saying, I'm coming up to renewal and my mortgage payment is doubling and it's a rental. I cannot afford to keep it. Um, but since the new value of the place that they've purchased is lower than what they bought it for, they can't move lenders.
Yeah.
You have to stay with the lender. So even if a different lender is offering you a better rate, if you can't move if the value is less, right? Because then the 80% loan to value, you has to be reappraised, unless you want to put a big lump payment down. And then he can't even sell because um, the value is so low. Like, I guess you could sell because he would have had 20% in. So let's say you bought something for 600 grand. The lender you're with right now, you have to renew because it's worth 500 grand now. It's going to be tough to pivot to a different lender and be approved. You're crazy negative. So you kind of have no choice but to carry on or sell it. And if it's worth 500 grand now, you're going to lose that, 100K down payment you've put into it. So you still would end up, you would sell it to literally just offload it, but your down payment goes with it. And that's only in a case where the values have come down significantly since you've purchased. But those are the saddest cases that I see because it leaves people feeling hopeless. And when people feel hopeless, that's where hostility comes out. When people are pushed into a corner, finances are something that trigger people, one of the top triggers, right? That leads to this hostility we're seeing, right? That leads to desperation. That leads to more crime. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we're
The
trending in the right direction, but to keep our population, I've always liked the social services at the bottom, despite not really agreeing with our government right now. We see less crime in Canada because there's not as many desperate people as you would see in the States because of our policies. Like, there's some things I agree with. Um, but lately there's definitely way more desperation in as a sentiment with our a lot of people, especially living in Ontario, which is sad to see.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, speaking just of rates here, a lot of people keep saying to me that, because I keep talking about this mortgage renewal wall coming up in 2025 and even this year, and how that's going to pull money out of the economy. You have, the main household who goes out and spends are, people who own homes, the middle class family. They're out there spending on dinners, on vacations, and all that. And everyone just keeps saying, well, the Bank of Canada sees this coming, they're going to drop rates, which they are dropping rates. The Bank of Canada is dropping rates, but it's not going to be significant enough to make a huge dent because they're going to be worried about reaccelerating inflation. Like, the bond yield today is 3.2%, roughly 3.3%. At the lows of 2020 and in 2021, the bond yield was under 0.5%. So in 2020, people are getting mortgages, same with 2021. Usually they get a 5 year. they're coming up for renewal now when the bond yield was about 0.5%. Now it's 3.5%. What's that? 7, 8 times what it is today. So you're going to have money coming out of the economy, which isn't a good thing, to be honest, because then we're going to see, slow growth and everything like that. But we're in this really hard point where you can't really decrease the rates too much, or else you could reaccelerate inflation. So, anyways, that's kind of my 2 cents there. But let's get on to the next topic here.
Yeah.
So, over 80% of new condo investors in Toronto are losing money on their rentals. More than 80% of new condo investors in the Toronto region are bleeding cash, as the rental income from their units is not covering the increased mortgage costs and cost of owning the property, according to a new report issued on Thursday. The losses are dissuading investors from buying new condo units, also known as pre-construction condos, because they have not been built yet, and the report said contribute to the lowest sales in 27 years in the first half of the year. The pre-construction condo market is clearly in recessionary territory, with conditions deteriorating to levels not seen in decades, said a report authored by condo research firm Urbanation Inc. and President Sean Hildenbrand and the CIBC Commerce Deputy Chief Benjamin Ta, who's very popular in Canadian real estate. Many more investors are paying out of pocket to cover the costs, a situation known as cash flow negative. According to the report, 81% of investors who took out a mortgage to buy a completed new condo this year were cash flow negative, losing an average of $605 a month. So that's pretty
Wow.
big, right? You have people who kind of speculated on the pre-construction market. You had people who thought that, money was just going to go up and the prices were going to go up. And here they are closing on these properties, and now they're cash flow negative. And they have to come up with that money themselves out of pocket, either through more debt or, I don't know, I guess maybe going into savings, selling off some TFSAs. I don't really know how these people are going to afford it, but it begs the question, how long can they hang on for? And not only that, is the appraisal actually appraising? That's a
Yeah.
big question. So,
Well, the worst part about this is, you know, if I think the price that I bought a pre-construction condo at is so good, compared to things now, like there's some pre-construction condos that if you bought 4 years ago are appraising and are up a ton, right? It really depends on the location. A lot of them, when they're just like really small little condos downtown Toronto where there's a ton of them, no parking, no, it probably hasn't really gone up at all. And probably maybe, some people are selling at a loss, making, the average sale for that specific unit, maybe even less than what you purchased for.
mhm.
There are some that are up. I bought one in 2019, so 5 years ago. It's up, right? There's some on King West that I sold 4 years ago. Those are way up, and that's King West. So the negative per month is okay at that point because they have an option. They can sell it because, they can decrease it even 10% and sell it right away because the values in those specific locations are up. It's just when the value of what you've purchased is lower and you have negative cash flow, which is like, oh my God, now we're in a predicament.
Yeah, and also the condo market in Toronto has like six months of inventory. So
That's
there's a lot of options for people to go out there and
yeah.
shop around. Take your time. I was reading one article. A guy had his place up for sale, and he said the feedback was always, "It's great. We're just not ready to make an offer. We've got a lot more to see." So
Yeah,
I'm worried about the condo market. I truly am. I think that there's a lot of indebtedness in there that's connected to people's primary residence.
yeah,
And a lot of people won't be able to come up with the funds or the money to cover the negative cash flow or even the appraisals. As you know, too, interim occupancy is pretty challenging at these rates. It's very high.
yeah.
And also like the fees and levies that some builders put on. Some girl got a bill for $40,000, and builders can do that.
Man,
It's hard to say, but yeah, you're kind of have a coin flip when you buy pre-construction on some of the fees that can end up coming to you at time of closing. So
yeah, there are some builders that I really like and I support because they have a track record, right? There's some builders I would stay far away from. And it's scary because even if your lawyer checks the agreement and you put a capped levy clause in it before firming up. There's still ways for a builder to add something different. So if your levies are capped at 10 grand, let's say, great, you get capped at 10 grand, but then there's something else over here. And I saw it happen firsthand with myself when I bought last year. There was a building in Burlington coming up to registration, and there was an underwater seller essentially. So he couldn't close on the unit. He had bought it 4 years prior, couldn't close. So he needed to sell it. So he was selling it at a pretty discounted price. And usually the rule is if you're selling on assignment like he was, you cannot use MLS because it, I guess, waters down the building. I'm not sure the actual reasoning, but I found it and on Facebook. And then I said, okay, I'll buy it for that. I'll buy it for your pricing because it was a good deal, even where things were. I'm like, I'll buy it. I'll put in 20 grand to this condo, make it look prettier, and then I'll just throw it on MLS. And there's just so much room for error that no matter if everything went wrong, I could still profit. And I run these numbers pretty in detail. Anyway, so we projected our closing costs. There was levy fee clause capped clause. And then it ended up being like 20 grand more than I had expected. And it's like, well, you protected yourself in every single way and the builder just found a way. And then you can't really fight it. Like there's just so many lawyers, like it just, you get yourself down a rabbit hole and you just got to pay it. And that's the crappy thing. Again, I still profited when I sold it, even after, the anti-flipping tax rule. It added the profit to my income, so I had to pay tax, had to pay the levies, had to pay the extra closing costs, had to pay lawyer fees and all of that. So sometimes there's a good deal if you just, look hard enough. But yeah, these are things, it's harder to make quick money in real estate right now. You have to be educated.
Yeah. It's challenging out there, that's for sure. There's a lot going on and a lot of unfortunate people are getting caught right now. So it's sad,
This is
but
off
it is what
topic.
it is.
You know what I learned yesterday?
But
I guess I didn't learn it. I guess I knew this, but so let's say somebody's selling a property in Canada and they're a non-resident, so they probably purchased prior to the foreigners ban. Okay. So when they're selling it, if that seller sells it, they're going to owe tax as a non-resident to the government, right? But if that's still outstanding, they sell it to a buyer and then that seller leaves, takes their money and leaves, and they didn't pay their essentially, I guess, whatever taxes on it as a non-resident selling property in Canada, it falls onto the buyer, the seller's tax owing.
yeah, remember the whole thing too with like the renter, it got put on the renter because they weren't paying their taxes or something, their property tax, and it goes onto the renter. Like what sense does that make?
Yeah. Well, the government's not going to lose their money. So if they think, okay, a seller is a non-resident, they just left and went back to their own country, it's way harder to find that person in another country than say, okay, well, now it's your problem.
Yeah,
Right?
that's
They're going to
crazy.
get their money one way or another. And to protect yourself against these things, there is a declaration of residency and it's a pre-printed clause in the offer. However, you're relying on your lawyer to have the seller's lawyer provide you with a declaration of residency and signed form that these taxes, if they're a non-resident, have been paid. And if your lawyer misses this, imagine buying a house and being slapped with 25%
Yeah.
tax
So why
owing to the
why doesn't
government
the lawyer why doesn't the
seller.
lawyer pay it though? Why is the resident paying if the lawyer didn't do
Anyway, it
his
falls
or
on the
her
buyer.
job?
Yeah,
That's
it's
crazy.
just so important these days
Yeah,
to be educated. And we saw so much blow up after the COVID
100%.
peak that, and not to say I know everything, but by no means am I saying I know everything, but it's like I could have kind of maybe protected you against that. And that's
Yeah,
not a way to say. It's just I've been doing it for so long that I've seen these cyclical, and I've seen so many mistakes.
for sure.
So
Yeah, a lot of mistakes that happen and they should be punished more scrutiny, but they're not. So people kind of get away with a lot in this
yeah,
business, which it shouldn't be. But anyways, you want to read the next one?
yeah. Okay. Bank of Canada says immigrants have housing and job challenges. Oh, you don't say. Instead, bank analysts said on Wednesday that immigrants typically increase rents, are slow getting employment, and contribute to inflationary pressures in some sectors. We've been saying this for a while. Strong population growth in recent years has boosted demand for housing, said a monetary policy report. This is adding to existing pressures on house prices and rents. The increase in housing demand from newcomers is being felt across all types of housing, but the largest initial impact tends to be in the rental markets. This is because most newcomers start out as renters. True. And when it comes to jobs, researchers said many immigrants face significant challenges integrating into the Canadian labor market. Difficulty getting foreign credentials and experience recognized in Canada also often results in newcomers taking jobs where skills do not match those requirements of the position. This potential mismatch, does it say mismatch? Your mouse is in front of it.
Oh, mine's not. It says yours is. This potential mismatch also weighs on product.
I couldn't see the last sentence, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I listened to this
we've
press
been saying it for a
conference.
long time. Like this is
Yeah.
just like almost redundant at this time.
Oh, it's
Um,
so redundant. It's just insane.
yeah, and it's like I know a lot of newcomers listen to our podcast. That's the other thing. It's like I am not against people coming to our country. It's that our country and our government is doing a poor job in supporting the people we bring here, right?
Yeah.
It's not the newcomer's fault. I understand wanting to come to Canada. I think Canada is a great country. I know we're having our tribunals and struggles right now, but I do. So it's not on the newcomers. I'm not saying don't come here because I don't want that person. It's just we're struggling in supporting this many people. And, you know, a lot of people point the finger at people wanting to come here, but if they're looking to come here, even if, you know, the economy is not doing well, but for a better life because of a third world country or, you know, whatever the case may be, even, you know, wars and wanting to come here, how am I going to fault them? Right. It's
Yeah,
the
no,
government.
it's everyone loses in this situation.
Yeah.
And our liberal government is just so delusional in their process where like they keep telling us like, okay, we're going to cap foreign students. And then a record amount of foreign students just came to Canada this year alone. So you have foreign students living in tents. And even like it says here, right, trying to get credentials for people who are actually qualified to come here and do jobs that aren't Uber Eats or low skill labor is nearly impossible. So here we are in um this constant cycle of like, okay, we don't have enough housing, right? There was the guy last week who went to a student housing in Brampton and there was like 17 people living in one 3-bedroom home. Like it's just
17.
17, or it might have been 19. I can't even remember what it
Ugh,
was, but this guy on TikTok went for a
no.
listing appointment in Brampton and he's like, I'm not listing this place. Like, how would I ever get people in?
No, you know what? So the property I was talking about, mine, it's a 2-bedroom bungalow. Okay, so I'm re-renting the top floor and I got an application for 7 people. And I'm like, no chance. And I had the price at 3650 for the upper floor. Keep in mind, this is a beautiful house and top of the line renovations and furnished. So you get more that way. Otherwise, rent would be probably 2,800 for the area. So my rent was 3650 posted. And I was like, no, can't do 7 people. That's just way too much for me to take on. And I said, okay, what if we do 4,100? So 4,100 just for the upper floor because I already have my basement rented. And I was like, and I still said no. I was like, nah.
No, it's
Like the
way too
wear
many
and tear
people.
on my
Yeah.
house is just not worth the extra $500 a month.
Yeah, 7 people for 2 bedrooms
Seven
is
people. I'm
just,
like, where are you going to sleep? Like, I don't want
yeah.
my house to, the amount of extra garbage,
The
the amount of
driveway, your
oh,
neighbors
no
are
way.
going to hate
No.
you.
No,
There's just too
I literally
many.
said no. And that's the thing. I'm negative on this house a little bit, right? Like I was saying. So it's like, ooh, that would kind of mitigate that. But I'm like,
Yeah.
I care for my house.
The
And
only way
not
to
to say
cash
that these
flow
people
is to
wouldn't
have too
take
many
care of it.
people. Yeah.
It's literally 7 people living in a 2-bedroom. The house is gonna suffer. You know, it's not built to support 7 adults in a 2-bedroom.
Oh, 100%. It makes no sense. But yeah, it was fun. It was interesting to see. It was Carolyn Rogers who is like Tiff Macklin's right-hand lady there. And she was talking about, she was like, it doesn't matter what we do with rates if we have so many people coming into the country, especially rents, right? Because usually people come here and
Right.
rent first. So it is like, yeah, everyone's getting screwed. I get it, but renters are also getting screwed a lot too, because rent has been so high for so long.
Yeah.
So yeah, it adds inflationary pressures. I had the Liberal Party tweeted out something about our GDP being positive or something along those lines. And even I put a comment on our Instagram and just said, just because you have mass immigration masking our GDP, because you have more people coming into the country, they have to spend money. That's not a productive economy. And if you look at GDP per capita,
Per capita.
it's negative. So at
And
the end
that's
of the
what you should focus on. You see how things are so masked because
even if you didn't look at metrics, right? Even if you just asked your five closest friends, they would say it is so expensive. It's
oh
so hard to get by. There's not a lot of jobs out there right now. The only thing growing is the public sector, and that's taxpayers' money.
yeah,
It's just that you don't even need these metrics to understand the pulse in the
yeah,
economy.
yeah, yeah.
So, anyways, you want to
True.
read that last one there?
Okay. What is happening with inflation and shelter? Shelter is nearly 30% of the CPI basket. According to Stats Canada last month, shelter inflation pushed higher to 6.2%, which has been led by an 8.8% annual increase in rent and a 22.3% year-over-year increase in mortgage interest costs. Jesus.
Hmm.
Rent, so that means a lot of people have renewed then.
Yeah.
Rent inflation is surging, inflating at its fastest pace in 40 years. But asking rents across the country decreased by 0.8% from May, the largest month-over-month decline since early 2021 during COVID-19, and reversing the typical seasonal trend of increasing rents at this time of year. Rents are flat and falling, home prices are falling, mortgage interest costs are easing. In other words, 30% of the CPI basket in real time is deflating. This means mortgage interest costs added 1.3 percentage points to headline CPI in June. Inflation ex mortgage interest cost was 1.4% in June, the lowest since early 2021. Okay,
Yeah.
so
So it's,
that would
it's interesting. Yeah. So like,
explain that for
yeah,
everyone.
the puck is going is things are coming down in terms of rents. Like rents are dropping 100%. They're dropping other than in Calgary. I think they're up.
Yeah.
Home prices are falling. We know that. So I guess it's like, are they not decreasing enough? Like, are they waiting too long? Like they waited to increase, and do they need to decrease more? I personally would say no. I would say that this kind of
Mhm.
helps alleviate inflation and not reaccelerate it, because I think that's the last thing anybody wants.
Yeah.
But we could see a 50 point basis cut next time around, right? It's really hard to tell what we see next, but I think he's going to stick to these quarter points, because remember during the peak inflation times, Tiff
Mhm.
Macklin actually increased the overnight rate by a whole percentage point, and that was like, wow, like he just did a whole point.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see what happens, but it's interesting to see that shelter cost has pushed up the CPI so much.
Yeah.
And that if we remove it, inflation is actually below the Bank of Canada's target. But you can't just be removing factors. I know that. It's just interesting to see that. So I just wanted to
Yeah.
add that in there, that maybe the puck is going somewhere where things are deflating in real time, and in that case, we need rates to come down further. I really don't know at this time, but like Tiff Macklin, he always gets asked these questions by reporters, like, next time, are you going to drop rates? What are you going to do next time? And he just says,
Yeah.
guys, like I take this data every month or every week and see, like, I don't know, like where we're heading is, yeah, I'm going to be dropping rates going forward if it stays like this and inflation gets down. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's just those press conferences are always a treat.
Yeah. You know what I do lately is I listen to them in French because I'm trying to increase my spoken French. And I find that not everything like it's interesting like the tone of like the French people versus English. It's like the same thing but different questions being asked and like I don't know.
Brooke's trying to
Just
get a job with the government because it just
just
pays
a
so
fun
well.
fact. Just a fun fact. If you're a French speaker, message me.
Yeah, Brooke can
Mhm.
help you speak French. And if you're the Canadian government, give her a call. She needs a job. She needs a summer contract. It's so slow out there.
That's so
Oh my
funny.
God. It's too funny. But yeah, what me and Brooke have been chatting about is people canceling listings, and, sellers are reducing their prices, but buyers aren't biting yet. It feels like it still needs a little bit more decrease, but we're also in the dog days of summer. So it's not, historically it's usually slow. So, it's hard to tell. I guess a big tell will be our fall market. September, October will
I
be
think it'll be busy.
you
I
think so?
feel it. I
You
just had
feel
like,
it?
there's so much like conversations I'm having, that I'm gearing up for it. Just in like the sense of like, in my markets, that doesn't mean the condo market's gonna start, I'm not
Yeah.
saying a blanket statement here.
Yeah.
Um,
Good
yeah,
points. Good
I,
points. Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it will.
A little bit busier. Hopefully we get a little push by the end of the year, but we, as always, will keep you guys updated on everything. That's what we love to do. Even in the boring summer times. It's good to know what's going on if you are preparing to make a move later on. So, Brooke, you got
Yeah.
anything else?
Nope, that's all for me.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it so much. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you can. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we'll see you guys next week. Oh, and if you want to book a call with us, you can do so down below. Love to hear from you in your
In
real estate
English or
situations.
French? I'm
Yeah.
joking, I'm joking.
If it's in French, it will not be with me, unfortunately. And yeah, thanks for being here. We'll talk to you
Thank
guys soon.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.